Hello, welcome everyone to the President's Briefing. We have about 194 registrants today, so I just want to remind you all of how we'll proceed. If you have a question during the presentation, you may ask questions using the Q&A function. I will not respond to the raised hand function or feature, but after the presentation, I will moderate a Q&A session with questions that were posted in advance. And if we have time in the questions that are asked as part of the Q&A feature. You'll hear from President Lemons, Reine, Sarmiento, Stanley, Bazile, and Ron Bergmann. With that, I'll turn it over to the President to get started.
Thank you, Yoshanda. Welcome to everyone. Good afternoon. Congratulations on finishing spring term of 2020 and the academic year. I think everybody deserves a real pat on the back. We've made it through something completely extraordinary. I hope you had a chance to watch the virtual recognition or virtual graduation ceremony, whatever we're calling it. If you did not get a chance to see it, still do take a look. And thanks to everybody who put that really great program together. I think it was, given what our circumstances are, I think we did something that was special for the class of 2020. And I hope that's how everyone feels who is graduating. So I'm happy to have with us, as Yoshanda said, Vice President for Enrollment Management, Reine Sarmiento, Vice President for IT and CIO, Ron Bergmann, and Dean of Students and Executive in Charge of Student Affairs, Stanley Bazile. So this is the third of what is a series of presidential briefings, and we're trying to use these times to get information out about a variety of things that are really current about the college, particularly given our current situation. So I'm very happy to have them with us. I'm going to just say a few things, and then I want to move on to them to have them present to us what they've prepared. But what I did want to say, probably in every one of these briefings, I'm going to say something about the budget, because that is really one of the big uncertainties that we have facing us of the two. And what I have to say is not really going to be terribly informative, because we haven't got a lot of new information. Today in his press conference, Governor Cuomo said that he hasn't made a budget decision before he knows what's going to happen with aid from Washington, D.C. We know he was meeting with President Trump yesterday morning, and out of that, we really didn't get any indication that there was discussion about state aid, so we just don't know. What he went on to say is right now, it's a 20% budget cut. And so that is really the same thing that we've known for the last month. We thought that April 30 we would get something clear, at least about the near term on the budget. And then we thought maybe May 15th. Now we're the end of May. We still haven't got that clarity. And so I think we're just going to be living with that uncertainty. And so we have to go ahead and plan using our best estimates of what we think may happen, knowing that it's likely to change in one way or another, and hopefully for the better. But we're not going to plan on hope. We're going to plan on what we think is our best estimate. And so what we decided to do is that to use a 10% reduction in state support as our guide. And that's really the basis of what we're moving ahead with, and that will be the basis of our budget plan. And we plan to submit our tentative budget on June 15th. Now maybe something will change by then that will inform that and will alter that in some way, but that's our plan. And that's all I'll say right now about the budget. There may be some questions about that later, but for now, I will leave that topic. And I would like to ask Vice President Sarmiento to present us what she has prepared. We need to unmute you.
What a great start. What a great start. I'm gonna catch so much heck from my division for this. Good afternoon. Thank you, President Lemons. I am joined today with Vice President Bergmann and Dean Bazile to give you a briefing on some of our areas. It's been about 11 weeks now since we left campus, and in typical Lehman fashion, we've really come together quickly, adjusting to work remotely. In IT, more than 350 faculty members participated in Blackboard sessions, and the IT help desk helped over 600 students, faculty, and staff adjust within the first weeks when we went remotely. In student affairs, they're busy maintaining the food pantry, coordinating scholarships, and handling referrals to the counseling center. All this while preparing for an online orientation to welcome our new students. And in enrollment management, a result of our collaborative efforts have resulted in over 8,300 students already registered for the fall semester. This includes nearly 1,300 new students who we've engaged virtually. And then in administration, and they're working on plans to be able to bring us back safely and provide an environment that's conducive to learning. This type of collaboration and caring is what makes Lehman a really special place. It's not the division, it's not the departments or the building and where you work that makes Lehman special. It's all of us and our dedication that we have to this special place. You know, Adam Grant said, every time we interact with another person at work, we have a choice. We have a choice to claim as much value as we can, or we can contribute value without worrying about receiving anything in return. And I think the latter exemplifies Lehman, especially today. Especially today because Lehman's graduation is a time when we reflect and affirm all of our staff efforts to get students to the finish line. Today, it's all worth it. So in many ways, our student services strive, our values are the same pre-COVID in the way we strive to deliver quality programs and services. But I guess now more than ever in this virtual format, we're utilizing every virtual tool we can to double down our efforts to deliver quality services remotely. It's not an option for us. It's what we know we need to do to maintain Lehman's greatness and to keep our promise as an engine of economic mobility for our students and our community. Next slide, please. In enrollment management services, collaboration is the hallmark of our success. In student success, I wanted to go over some questions regarding the credit, no credit policy. As grades are coming in, and they're due today, students have until June 25th to opt in for this. Now, it's important to note that this option is displayed in CUNY first. And what our data and our feedback is coming back from students is that the option in CUNY first is not all that clear. Some students are clicking on this option for credit, thinking it might be a question of, do you want credit for the semester? So I ask that we inform students and students that are listening, if you like your grades the way they are, take no action. And questions regarding whether it impacts the GPA, the credit, no credit has no impact on a GPA, aside from grades like failing grades where it does negatively impact. And there were also questions about financial aid, and they're too variable to even go over. It all depends on how you're progressing through and your grades and your credits completed as to how this policy will affect you. In terms of academic advisement, some people have been asking, how do I get advisement? Well, there's several ways. You could visit the lehman.edu/virtual services to find departments across the campus with their contact information. In many instances, there'll be the names, emails, phone numbers, and each of the department have different ways of contacting students, whether that be appointments or even having a virtual room where you could just come in. For all those students who don't know where to go, we do have an email called helpcoach@lehman.cuny.edu, and that allows us to route your questions to the appropriate department. We've reached out to over 5,400 undergrad students with this particular form that we're using in support of the academic units. There have been questions about new student advisement too. As new students move through the application and matriculation process, we're going to reach out to those students when it's time to advise. So whether it be the ACE, SEEK, ADP program, they're going to be reaching out to new students to be able to let them know when it's time to register. And in terms of for us, there have been many ways in which we could contact students. The best way we've known is to reach out to them directly. So we do have a calling campaign. We've reached over 4,000 students in our last campaign. This campaign, we'll be reaching out to over 3,000 new students who have committed but have not registered. So if you're interested in joining the efforts to be able to make sure these students find their way to Lehman, please contact me. In terms of finances, there are 4 options. The first one is students already know this. If you filled out a FAFSA, you could qualify for summer Pell, TAP, or even if a loan if you qualify. So those are the things that existed. In terms of COVID, there was a distribution of CARE Act funds. To date, 9,000 students have received refunds totaling over $6 million. And the range of the award ranges from $188 to $940. If you're unsure whether or not you want to see if you're qualified, you don't have to do anything. It's all tied to the FAFSA, and we'll be reaching out to you. And in terms of the bursar's office, they have set up a bursar form on their website. So if you're unable to make payments, they're there ready and willing to help make payment arrangements so that you could register for the summer and the fall. And I guess the last thing is there's been a lot of questions regarding the status of financial aid. Think about this. When you walk into an office, you're handled one thing, but most students have multiple things to talk about. So imagine, now that we're remotely, having one email for multiple students with multiple things. It's caused a little bit of a backlag in the way we respond. So our average time to respond to emails is 5 to 7 working days. And if you've submitted documents, it could take up to 21 days to hear back from us. But if you want to know the status, you could always check CUNY First for updates. And all I ask is that you leave some time for the offices to be able to respond to you. And lastly, when it comes to the status of your financial aid, if you've got a hold on financial aid in CUNY First, or a hold for that matter, something that's missing, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't register for classes. So if you've submitted documents in financial aid, chances are it's still there, but you could register for classes, which gives us time in financial aid to process your documents. So that's all for enrollment management. Dean Bazile?
Thank you, Vice President Sarmiento. I first want to say it's a great honor to be presenting to all the folks who are logged in, specifically students. We do recognize within student affairs and within all the divisions at the college that this is a difficult time. It's unprecedented, but there is hope. I want to steal from what Reine said in terms of my favorite books from the Shawshank Redemption. There's a line that says, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. And so at Lehman, we deal in the currency of hope. We have not disappeared when this crisis came about. We as a division, we as a college band together and said, how do we support each other? It wasn't just about students. It wasn't just about faculty. It was about everybody. We were all going through this crisis, and we were all going to get through it together. That's the only way that we were going to survive. So I am incredibly proud and honored to talk about the services that we've done. But as I'm talking about the things that come out of student affairs, it's also very important for folks to know that this has been in close collaboration with Vice President Sarmiento, with Vice President Bergmann, with the President, with Provost Wosu, with the various people in and outside of the university. So as the Dean of Students and the executive in charge, one of the things that my office does is that we serve as a conduit between different offices. We see ourselves as a place where we advocate for students. Oftentimes when students have an issue or they have a question, or they're just quite confused about something, they come immediately to us. And then my office is immediately pulled into action to say, okay, so how do we direct these questions in the right manner? Rather than the student having to go from one area to the other, we have a scope of understanding. We know our colleagues, and I'm able to direct them directly if it's a question about advisement, if it's a question about financial aid, because we have those relationships. As soon as we get those emails, we send them. The other thing that we were working on, and I want to announce this, is that under the stewardship of Dr. Lemons and Dr. Wosu, we had created a food insecurity task force. And then when this is prior to COVID, and when we looked at this, we saw that a number of our students had basic needs that they needed to be addressed in order for them to be successful, in order for them to get to the finish line. And I'll talk about what the finish line is shortly. So what we had done, we had started investing resources in creating a basic needs center. This was going to be something that was going to be in person. But we recognize that now that you're off campus, we still need this basic needs center. And so it's now virtual. And within this basic needs center has emergency grants. It has a career closet. So, and then it's also where the food pantry, a lot of the services have come out from there. And within these emergency grants, I want to talk a little bit about what those grants are. So we have the Petrie grant, where if you can see on the website, which is on the COVID website as well as the Student Affairs website, if you need emergency money now more than ever, students are in great need. Many of our students have lost their jobs, many of their partners, many of their family members, they're struggling. And so we have resources that have been allocated to us to provide resources to students. In addition to that, we also recognize that the Petrie funds only go to students who are eligible under Title IV. But we have quite a few students who are international students. We have quite a few students who are dreamers. We also have quite a few students who are undocumented. And we wanted to be able to provide resources for them as well, because they are also part of the Lehman family. So we have received through a very generous gift from the Robin Hood Foundation, over $100,000 for us to disseminate funds to students who fall into this category. And we have had quite a bit of applications for these funds. We still have some funds available. So there are applications available. So if you go on the website, you can apply. We will try to move on it as soon as possible, because we know you need that money as soon as possible. And in addition to that, I also want to say that I can't say it enough, that the faculty and the staff at Lehman also stepped up. Lehman Cares. And so we came up with a Lehman Cares Foundation, where faculty and staff have contributed money that we also are able to disseminate to students. So it's very important that you know about this. Now, when you come to college, obviously you do that because you want to get a competitive advantage in your current or future vocation. Career Services has moved online. All of our offices have moved online, and you still have access to have conversations about fixing your resume, career conversations in terms of, okay, I have this major, I've done this internship, what can I do? The other thing, unfortunately, we had a career fair that was canceled. However, we've still been able to maintain relationships with our business partners, and we have been sending our resumes of our high achieving students to these business partners and still giving them the opportunity to potentially get gainful employment. We also have a child care center. Many of our students are parents, and it's a competing obligation that we don't want the student to say, do I take care of my child or do I focus on my academics? You can do both. And because we have the child care center, you're able to put your child in the child care center. It has stayed open throughout the COVID, and it will continue to stay open. We also realize that this is a very incredibly stressful time for students, where students oftentimes just need to unpack what exactly is going on right now. This is something that we were not prepared for, and it's highly stressful. I can even tell you, as a parent of a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, it's very difficult. But I also have a 22-year-old daughter who graduated last year. And I can imagine the stress that she would have went through when she was in the University of Florida. And so oftentimes we have a career center, but we also have the counseling center where you can have conversations, where you can engage and just talk a little bit about how to balance stress, how to be successful. At the end of the day, Lehman wants you to get to the finish line. And when I say finish line, we're not talking about commencement, because obviously commence means to begin. The finish line is graduating and then getting gainful employment, joining the 90,000+ robust alumni who have come from Lehman, who are in the workforce and make Lehman proud. These are just some of the exciting opportunities that are within student affairs, but I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Vice President Bergmann, who will talk about how we've been able to support you remotely in information technology.
Thank you, Dean Bazile, and I'm pleased to join you and VP Sarmiento and the President to be on this panel. Thank you very much. And I just want to reinforce that the words about working in partnership and working in collaboration are very real. And this crisis has shown that our college has risen to the occasion. We have more work to do, but we've done an amazing job across faculty, staff, and students to address the challenges that we face. And in many ways, the story of Lehman is the story about overcoming adversity. And we see that with the stories of our wonderful graduates today. And I just want to reinforce the fact that I'm very proud to be part of this leadership team and very proud to serve under our amazing president who has shown extraordinary leadership. And our provost who's guiding us through these times. I want to talk a little bit about the technology students that we're providing primarily to students and also to faculty and staff. As we all know, we've been thrust into much more of a digital experience, but the important piece is to make sure that the good things about our community that we experience on campus can also happen as much as possible in the virtual world. IT has three goals in working with our partners. One is to connect people and ensure access, to increase the digital competencies of our community, and also to provide resources so that we can make informed decisions. One of the most important things that we've done early on was the device loaner program. We bought from Lehman a small number of Chromebook laptops to make available, and through the insight and early work of CUNY to buy a large number of iPads and laptops as well. We have a fairly considerable supply that has helped us, and so to date, more than 670 students have received devices. We've sent them out through UPS so that students wouldn't have to go to campus, and they will be able to keep these devices if they've had them this semester to continue their work. If they're enrolled for summer and fall classes, students are able to keep those devices. And we will work with our colleagues to provide devices to incoming students, most of which at this point will be iPads with keyboards. But I want to also say that we could not have done this without the extraordinary work of our colleagues in student affairs and without the assistance of VP Reine Rotolo and the Division of Administration and Finance. So thank you to those folks. We'll also be publishing some guidelines of students who have devices and have graduated, how to return them, and also the program that we'll have for incoming students. The next area is really around online meeting tools. And so the three main meeting tools that we have used within Lehman and within CUNY are Blackboard, Collaborate within the Blackboard ecosystem, and also Teams, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom. I should say that Zoom had some issues with privacy and security early on. They've worked very hard to rectify that, and so I feel much more comfortable with recommending Zoom as a tool. And in fact, because it's so easy to use and widely used, we are happy that they have done the work to get back into a place where we can securely use it. Within Lehman also, I should say that we have a variety of tools that support students, faculty, and staff with regard to Lehman 360. I encourage students to keep using it. It also is used for early alerts. It can connect to iDeclare for the declaration of major. And we have this amazing tool that we've worked on with Reine Sarmiento's area, so that we have the declaration of major on the one hand, but also the ability for incoming students to transfer their credit evaluation, what used to take almost a semester sometimes of the year, now takes days and weeks. So moving on, the IT help desk has been operating 7 days a week since mid-March, and we've provided services to more than 7,000 individuals, and that they're addressed very quickly, and we'll continue to support students, faculty, and staff as we go through the summer and into the fall. So please make use of that service. And then we've worked very closely with our colleagues to expand orientations, to provide workshops and office hours and one-on-one sessions to support people as they use Microsoft Office, as they use Blackboard in new ways. And that kind of collaboration and teamwork and the ability to grow in the use of these tools has expanded. And so we're going to continue to do that, especially with our incoming students. And then finally, I want to mention to faculty and staff that we will be transitioning to Office 365 for email, and that we're going to start testing this in the mid-June timeframe. I'm very excited about it because it will increase our ability to collaborate, and because students are already using Office 365, it'll enhance our ability to collaborate with students. We'll have improved functionality, and so please keep on the lookout for emails that we will send with regard to our ability to move in this direction and better leverage Office 365 going forward. So I will sign off by saying I wish you all a healthy and safe summer, and we'll go now back to Yoshunda for the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, VP Bergmann, Dean Bazile, and VP Sarmiento. So President Lemons, VP Sarmiento touched on this a little bit, but there's a question here that's about students being eligible to receive emergency student grants from the government in addition to stimulus checks. Is it true that that money is available? And if so, how can people find out more?
Do you want to take that one on, Reine? Or do you want me to respond? So I'm going to start, and VP Sarmiento is going to fill in probably some things that I'll miss. So as was mentioned by VP Sarmiento, the checks went out last week to students, and it was done, the distribution of the funds that came from the CARES Act, which for CUNY was a total of $236 million. So it was a sizable amount of money, and half of that is to be distributed directly to students, so not for any use by any of the colleges or the campuses. The central administration took on the task of distributing that funding, and they worked out a distribution formula that was based on Pell eligibility. And so there was a baseline amount that every student got, regardless of their Pell status. And that was, I recall, around $350 for full-time students. But part-time students got half of that. But then it went up to a larger amount for students that were 100% Pell eligible. And then if students had a child or children and other family circumstances, would go up to that amount that VP Sarmiento mentioned, about $920 in that range. So those checks went out, or they were direct deposited if direct deposit was set up. There were about 40,000 CUNY students who would have received those funds, but haven't received them yet because they hadn't filled out a FAFSA. So if there are students here and you're one of those, it's unfortunate that you have to take that step, but you can get those funds if you complete the FAFSA. But that's not a CUNY requirement. That was a federal requirement with distributing the funds. So that's direct funding that's gone out or still will be going out to students. The other CARES Act funding does go directly to institutions and to the university. Some of that may also be used for some direct support of students. We don't know exactly how that was going to work out yet. There's some small amount of the actually direct to student funding that is coming to the college. It's very small, it's only 3%, which will be distributed in ways that seem to maybe take care of students who were missed in some way or who have special needs, that the formula that was used didn't quite help in the way it could. So there is going to be some more distribution there. And then there's, you know, we've been working very hard to raise money, particularly for students who could not receive that CARES Act funding. Students who were not Title IV eligible, Dreamers, non-documented students were not able to receive those funds. So we have raised through the campaign for Lehman about $550,000 so far. We set out to raise $1 million. And some of those funds are going for support of the food pantry or the food program that we have, the virtual food pantry at this point, for emergency grants, for some scholarships. So we're trying to fill in some of what the federal funding would not take care of. We're working very hard at that because we know that the needs are tremendous. Maybe I'll come to a close and I'll let VP Sarmiento to add on to this if she wants to, but I'll just add one thing because there was a question that came in about what do we know about the increased student need during COVID-19. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone. 60% of our students at least come from the Bronx. The Bronx has been extremely hard hit by the virus and is being very hard hit financially. CUNY did a survey across the whole university of students to try to understand what was happening to them. And we did get a breakout of the data that came from Lehman students. And I can tell you that almost 40% of Lehman students who had some form of employment have lost their employment. And of those students who have lost their employment or their families have lost employment or was part of what supported them, well over 50% do not know how they will replace that. So we know just from that survey, there are more details in that survey, but that paints a pretty grim picture of what we know students are facing. So Renee, what would you like to add?
The only thing I guess I would add is that there is a time limit to apply. So I would encourage students, if you haven't filled out the FAFSA, please fill out the 1920 FAFSA, and you have until June 15th. Yep, June 15th to be able to qualify for the funds.
So I wanted to pose this question to VP Bergmann, actually, because it was one that came up in the past, which is about what's being done to help students, new and existing, with getting reliable internet services. So I'll let you answer this live if you're able to.
Sure. It's a good question and it's an important question. I look forward to the day when residents of the Bronx and the city have reliable internet access in the same way that we all have water supplied, heat, hot water, and so on, that it's just part of our living situation. And we know that too many students don't have reliable or high-speed access, and that's a barrier. So we do have a limited number currently of Wi-Fi access points that we've provided to special populations. And if there's a special need that you have, I would ask that you speak to Dean Bazile's office, in particular Danny Santos and his team, and we will do what we can to supply this. But they're very limited right now. And our goal when we receive CARES Act money under the leadership of the president is to purchase more of the Wi-Fi access points. And so we hope to make them more widely available. but they are still currently in limited supply. And in fact, because manufacturers haven't kept up with their production, they're very hard to get. So we'll do our best. We understand it's an issue. There are still internet service providers that are providing free access. There are some limitations to that, and I advise everybody to be careful. But we will supply, when we send out the iPad or Chromebook, we will supply information about how to access those services as well. I also just want to point out there's an additional question, if I may, Yoshenda, with regard to is the ability to obtain devices available for incoming fall students, and the answer is yes. We'll be sending out information, and students will fill out an online form in order to access devices. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There's a question, and I think that I should address this to the president. It came in ahead of time. If we continue online and the Board of Trustees recommends a massive reimbursement of student activity funds for students, will staff that are funded from these funds be furloughed or laid off? And will their respective programs be dissolved?
Okay, that's a really good and a tough question. One of the things that you know that for the spring term, 25% of the activity funds were returned to students because it was determined that that was as close as could be calculated equivalent to what students were really not able to take advantage of by not being on campus. And this hasn't been addressed yet, and I don't think it will be addressed for a while until the fall term is really clear in terms of how it's going to happen. But I imagine there will be discussions around this in terms of, now I'm looking at this first from the student side, in terms of what students would be expected to pay in terms of fees or not. From the staff side, it's because we made a commitment through the spring term to retain all staff. And that we went into an emergency situation. We had budgeted for staff. We received some CARES funds that we are pretty sure we will be able to apply to the staffing that's directly COVID-19 related. So we really felt that we needed to continue everybody through the spring term and really through the fiscal year. Going into the fall, this is all part of the overall budget picture that we're facing. I think you probably know that a large part of our budget is personnel. You may not realize that it's over 90% personnel. So if we face a 20% budget cut from the state, obviously that 20% cuts in way beyond what is costs that are related to other than personnel costs, to things like keeping the buildings and the grounds together and running our IT operation, all those kind of infrastructure kinds of things. We can't cut those out. And the only place that we really have that we can work with is around personnel. So our goal is always going to be to keep people employed and to keep people working at the college, because we know we need those people. They're providing very important services, but we're also required to balance our budget. And so that's really the very difficult place we could find ourselves. And if there are student fees that don't cover all of that, that could put us into a difficult spot. I can't really tell you if that's going to happen, and if it does, exactly how we would do that. But I can just tell you that people are a high priority. They're the highest priority for us. And that's the way we want our decision-making to start.
Thank you, President Lemons. Has there been any discussion about considering a wage reduction for full-time faculty and staff in order to keep a higher number of people on payroll?
That sounds like a question for me.
I think it is.
So we have not gone in that direction yet, because we're looking at other ways that we think that we can deal with the 10%, but likely 10% reduction in our revenue from the state. So we haven't looked at that. again, we don't know the future. We don't know if the governor will really make good on his threat of 20% reduction. That would make life much harder for us in terms of meeting that and meeting what we have to do in terms of a balanced budget. And I would hesitate to say that anything is really off the table that we can do in a way that is fair and that is equitable, and that really, again, goes back to people first, because that's what we really have to do. We can be faced with really tough choices, and we can have to make choices that we really don't want to make. It's like going into this crisis, somebody said, no good choices, only good decisions. And I really think that's where we've been this whole time. And yes, if we are faced with even more difficult choices, then we're going to have to continue to do that, hanging on to our values. And I wouldn't rule anything out at that point that can stay consistent with our values and can be equitable.
Thank you, Dr. Lemons. There's a question that has come up a couple of times about higher enrollment for summer classes, so I'm not sure who to direct this to, but here's the question. Wouldn't it serve our students to run summer classes with 7 students or more or a higher enrollment?
So that's a good question, and I think VP Sarmiento might have something to add in here after I respond. One of the very critical things, and unfortunately this has to go back partly to the budget, but not entirely, because we want to make sure that students get the classes that they need to graduate and to make progress in their academic program. And sometimes we have to run classes which are lower than would really be justified by just looking at the budget, because we know they're critical and they're a group of students that if they can get that class or those classes, will be able to graduate and finish. So budget is not the only consideration. At the same time, the summer is part of our overall annual budget situation, and we have to make sure that the summer runs at least at a net zero, but hopefully can contribute to helping us to get to a balanced budget. And to do that, class sizes have to be enough to cover at least the cost of their classes. So, at a minimum, that is covering the cost of the instructor, whether it's one of our full-time faculty or it's a part-time faculty member that's teaching that class. That cost has to be covered, as well as other costs that are a little more hidden but are real in terms of running the summer session. So on the whole, no, we cannot on average run 7 persons in a section, but we looked for what's an average number that we need across all of the sections to really make it work. And so sometimes it could mean that. So VP Sarmiento, I'm sure you've got something to add to that.
I guess in terms of summer enrollment, I just want to be able to kind of clarify something that VP Rotolo has been saying about summer enrollment. I think that people think that the summer enrollment is a way to be able to kind of catch up with finances, when in reality, the tuition revenue that we get for the summer is a way to be able to, over the last few years, balance our budget. So what President Lemons just said in terms of class sizes and making sure that there is enough to be able to run the class is important, but equally important is that we also don't want to leave any students behind. And so I think the deans have done a tremendous job in making sure that the classes that are offered this summer are really looked at as to whether or not it can be merged with another section, it could be cross-listed with another section, and then making sure that the students who are in their last classes are able to get those classes they need to graduate. So I think I just want to shout out the deans for the work that they've done for this summer in ensuring that not only are they looking at class sizes, but they're also looking at student success.
Thank you, VP Sarmiento. President Lemons, I think this is another question for you, but you may have other ideas. This is a question about other CUNY campuses that are threatening to cut adjunct faculty and college-wide college assistants. How is Lehman any different, and how will it protect the jobs of the most vulnerable?
Yes, there has been a big difference across the university in the way colleges have dealt with the uncertainty around the budget. And I think the most notorious, maybe infamous is the right word, is John Jay College, because they announced that they were not reappointing all of their part-time faculty members. And that has gotten and continues to get a lot of coverage in the press, even the national press. And I think there's some important background around that. The John Jay College made that decision independently, which all the colleges really are doing. The central administration is working with everybody, and there are guidelines, but really the colleges are mostly going to navigate their way through this in their own kind of unique ways. So John Jay decided that since they didn't know what the budget situation would be, and they also are, unlike Lehman College, have essentially no fund balance going into this. So they were very concerned about how much they would be able to allocate for part-time faculty members. Of course, they're going to hire part-time faculty members, there's no question about that. They just didn't know how many, so they decided to make that call. We did not decide to take that approach at Lehman College. What we decided to do is to wait as long as we absolutely could for reappointment and non-reappointments, because we really did not want to put everybody through the trauma of receiving a non-reappointment letter and then later, oh, now we actually have a class, we do need to appoint you to teach a section. We didn't want to go through that. In fact, the chancellor reached out to the PSC and requested that there be a delay in the deadline from May 15 to the end of May, which is tomorrow, May 29, to do the appointments and non-reappointments. And eventually the PSC agreed to that. And that has helped, but unfortunately the clarity in our budget didn't materialize as we hoped it would. What we hoped is that we would actually know a whole lot more about the budget and what the governor was going to do in terms of reductions, so that we could appoint the number of adjuncts that we really knew we could fit into our budget. And obviously we want to do that to the maximum that we can. Since we don't know, as I mentioned, we are planning in general around a 10% reduction, just because that's what will enable us to meet that budget target. But and I think at Lehman College, we will continue to try to take that approach of being cautious and careful with the budget, but trying to be also as protective as we can be of our part-time faculty members.
Thank you, Dr. Lemons. You have also mentioned this, and I think it's come up a couple times in other regards or in other fashions from other people. There's a question about why online courses or online delivery doesn't cost the same. Why does it cost the same price as in-person online delivery of classes? Many of us feel it's not fair, particularly if we're not receiving the same learning experience that we sign up for.
That's a question I've heard quite a lot. And again, that's a question that's being asked in every part of the country at every college and university that went to distance learning in the spring. And I completely understand where that question is coming from, because the experience that students have had has varied a great deal. For many students, I think it's been really good. Students who are already used to taking at least some online classes, and they've had a really kind of uniformly good experience. But that's not true of everybody, I know, because this has been a tough transition. So why are we going to continue to pay the same tuition for this experience? Is not what we feel like we signed up for. And I totally get that sentiment, and there's a way in which that makes sense. The other way that has to be looked at is that, I mentioned this before, that in terms of our costs, over 90% of our costs are personnel. And all of the personnel that began the spring term are still with us at the end of the spring term. So all of those costs and expenditures are still there. It's costing the same amount for us to deliver those courses now that it did before. In fact, it's really costing us quite a bit more. The reason it's costing more is because we're having to invest in technology in ways that we would not have. And we are going to have to continue to do that, both hardware and training of faculty members, hopefully getting loaner computers and hotspots to all the students that need them for the summer and the fall. So these are all a lot of extra costs that we're going to have. Now, fortunately, and maybe this goes back to another question that I saw about the CARES Act that was asked during this session. What is the CARES Act for? Well, fortunately, some of these expenses we are going to be able to use the CARES Act funding for. That other half of the CARES Act for Lehman College of the 13.6 million roughly, or maybe around 14 million, about 7 million of that is not going directly to students. Some of that's going to be used by the central administration for costs that they haven't taken on for all the campuses. But we'll have some of that money and a significant piece of it that will come to the college that we can use to reimburse COVID-19 related expenses. That's really what that funding's designated for. We can't use it to address our budget bottom line or baseline, but we can use it for some of these extra costs that we're encountering for the going online that we've done or that we will be doing completely in the summer and in the fall. So that's a long answer with a lot of different aspects to that, components to that question. But I think it's a really good question. But I think, that just to finish up, the VP Bergmann will know this very, very well. But at the very beginning of the move to some online and then fully online programming in institutions like the University of Phoenix that went fully online, lots of colleges and universities tried to jump into that in a very big way, thinking that it would be a real moneymaker. It hasn't really turned out to be that way. It's not a big moneymaker. It's a great way to serve students. It's a great way to provide students with more options for how they can get their degrees. But from an institutional point of view, it's not a moneymaker. And it really has its own kind of unique set of expenses. And so, Lehman College was way ahead of all the other CUNY senior colleges in online education before COVID-19. Over 20% of our classes were online or partially online. So we had a head start in that, and we're doing that really because it serves students, not because we think that that's really something that's a great way to address our budget bottom line. Maybe VP Bergmann wants to add into that.
I think that makes sense, and I agree. We are in unique circumstances and have learned a great deal from our online teaching and learning. I think there's more assessment to be done about how we can do better, make the experience richer for students, and make sure that there's a good peer exchange among both faculty and students so that we, again, create that sense of community that we experience on campus. But, we have many instances of online, to your point, President Lemons, of online learning institutions that have gone out of business because they did not scale it correctly, or they did not properly prepare. And so I think the idea here is that we want to ensure continuity to the maximum extent possible. There still remain significant expenses, in fact, more expenses, as you point out, and that we will work together as a community to ensure that we address this together.
There's one more question here that I think has come up because of the California decision to stop using the SAT for admissions. VP Sarmiento, maybe you can answer this question, or if you wanted to, Dr. Lemons, you could as well. Can we stop using SAT for admissions for the fall and go test optional permanently, since the exam only shows the wealth status of those who prepare for it?
You want me to take that, President Lemons?
Please.
So I think there is rich data out there that shows that the SAT is not a valid instrument for student success. And I know that Lehman is looking at this issue as well, and that there are numerous colleges that have gone SAT optional. But Lehman is not the only one. CUNY Central, all of CUNY is looking at the SAT optional. But I think that at least for Lehman, we have to be really careful about that, because we have to also look, if we don't have the SAT, what variables that we do have to be able to make sure that students are successful when they begin their studies at Lehman. So we're not the type of college that could do a holistic review. We just don't have the staffing for that. And so we're going to be working with the governance structures to be able to look at how our students are progressing, and then looking at the SAT. I know that the chair of the psychology department has looked at this once before, and so we're anxious to be able to visit this when the faculty are back in the fall.
Great, thank you. Dr. Lemons, I think that's our time. So if you have any closing words, then feel free.
Sure. You know, there's a question that I actually wanted to just get back to very quickly before time is up. And that has to do with what are we doing to raise revenue, reductions in our budget. And that is really a very good question. And, you know, even before COVID-19, we've been really focused on that. How can we free up funding that we can use to invest in ways that will help our bottom line and raise revenue? You know, I mentioned this, you know, that I have mentioned in the past and written about that we have a structural deficit, which is that our revenues are increasing at a rate that's less than our expenses. So expenses are outrunning our revenues. How do we can solve that by trying to work on expenses, which we are, but the better way is to try to increase revenues. And that's something that we've been working on and planning about for some time. Of course, we can try to do that, and we are, from private sources for scholarships and for special programs. But the other way we can do that is by structuring our programs differently so that we can actually pull in another group of students and increase enrollment, which definitely helps our bottom line, and take care of those students well. So it's something that the President's Advisory Board has been working on, actually now going on for the entire academic year. And we've been slowed down a bit because of having to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, but we are actively working on some big ideas about how we can actually do some additional programming and structuring in a way that can help our bottom line and raise revenue, which is what we want. And then if I can, how many minutes do I have yet, Dershunda?
2.
Okay, so 2 is good. I wanted to just wrap up. It is a question that came in the chat, and I wanted to respond to this anyway, but what about reopening the campus, and what is happening with that, and what is the possible timing? So first of all, you know that the governor has set these 7 parameters that all regions have to meet. Now, New York City is the only region that has not met all 7 parameters to begin reopening as a region. And when that reopening can begin, there are 4 phases, and education is the last of the 4 phases. So we'll be the last of the last, literally, in the entire state to begin to reopen. But what does that really mean? Does it mean we're going to open up the campus and suddenly we'll have people on campus? No, it doesn't. We have a task force that's working now to really work out the details of how we would do that. But I can tell you right now, the overriding principle is safety. And our very first line of safety is to have the minimum number of people on campus and the minimum number of people coming to and from the campus. Until the conditions change, and we know that we're in the county, we're in the borough that's hardest hit in the city, we're in the county that's really hardest hit in the entire country. we have to be extremely careful at what we do about protecting other people. We do not want to be a source of viral transmission. So we're going to do that by first keeping the numbers as low as we can, but bringing back really vital functions that we really need to have on campus in a way that we can do safely. So that's our goal. That's what we'll be doing. As soon as there's a go-ahead from the governor to begin to do that, we will do some of that. But we will only make those steps when we feel we can do it safely. And meeting not only the guidelines that are imposed on us, but being convinced that our own standards are being met. So I think that wraps our session probably. I want to thank everyone again for coming. It's really great to have so many showing up and participating and asking questions. Again, I know we didn't get a chance to address all the questions that came in. We'll continue to keep track of them, and we will continue to work away at answering those questions and keeping you up to date. So thanks for coming. Have a good afternoon.